Hi, well, how are you?
Good, thank you.
So just to introduce you to everyone, this is Laura Schutzer, who is the UK Sales Director for Equilibrium. Well, look, let's get started. So before I go into sort of my presentation, Laura, do you just want to give a little background to the Equilibrium sort of Stellar Headcollar story?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. So some of you may know Equilibrium has been manufacturing products for over 20 years. And over recent years, we've sold a product that particularly kind of led to the development of Stella, and that's our muzzle protector, which is a product that horses wear during the summer for those that are particularly sensitive to the sun, and you attach it to a head collar. Of course, when we were out talking to customers and retailers, we would always get asked, do you sell a head collar that we can attach the muzzle protector to? Of which our answer at the time always had to be no. We would often get asked for recommendations on, you know, are there particular safety head collars that you guys recommend as a sort of manufacturer that's really keen to make sure that horses are kept safe and have, you know, strong well-being attributes. And there wasn't anything we could recommend. And this went on for many years. And eventually, sort of 2.5, 3 years ago, I think we hit a point where we felt that perhaps this was something that we would look to address. You know, we were always being asked for recommendations. And so, as you know, we then started to work with you to kind of look at, actually, is it something that is needed? Is there a viable safety head collar out there? Is there a head collar that we can recommend and have the confidence to recommend, even if it's not one of our own? And that's where we took the sort of leap to create the survey and have a look. And of course, you'll talk about that in more detail. But from a manufacturer perspective, we were pretty horrified, I think, as to what we got back. We anecdotally had got feedback of accidents and injury, but of course, when you see it in the black and white terms that we did through the survey, it really led us to think, okay, well, actually, in terms of our product development, perhaps the head collar and a safety head collar is something that we should move to the top of the priority list. And that's really where it came from, you know, being constantly asked for recommendations, looking to see if there was a problem in the market, which is often our way of developing a product, realizing that there was, and then of course going down the long route to develop what we know now 2 years later to be Stella, to kind of fix that void. And so that's really the sort of the story as to why and how we created this product.
Brilliant. And I think I'd like to just make it clear at the start, so that we don't have any rumors or you know, people being suspicious. I am completely upfront that I did paid work for Equilibrium, and I have done on other projects for you in the past. Yeah. But I don't get any benefit from sales of any Equilibrium product. I don't have any ongoing retainer with Equilibrium, and I'm not paid anything to promote Equilibrium products above anyone else's. So that's just for clarity. The only work I get paid for is the work that I actually do for you in development.
Yeah, absolutely. And with what you do for a job, as you well know, and as we sign up to, if you test one of our products and they don't stand up to it, then, you know, you act appropriately. So yeah, I think that is a really important point to make. You know, for us, it's about working in a really transparent way, but we want to make sure that products are tested, have got that backing behind them. And of course, we've worked with you on Stella and other projects, but there's plenty of other testing that you've done where it's been, you know, other brands kind of thrown into the mix. And, you know, because we have such significant research and development budgets, and it's a real core reason we exist as a brand, it's of no surprise to us that we perform well, because that's what we're about, creating products that make a difference to horses' lives. And so we know you or anybody else that tests the products, we've got confidence that because of the routes we've taken to bring them to market, that, you know, they should perform well, and they do perform well, because that's how we get them to the place of kind of hitting the shelves in the first place.
Yeah, and the other thing is, again, you know, this is a free webinar. I'm not being paid anything to do this. My motivation.
Neither am I, David.
But my motivation for doing this is because there is an important, health and safety and welfare message here. The paper, which one of the papers we're going to talk about, was published actually as an open access journal by the Equine Veterinary Education journal, to make sure it would reach as many vets as possible, and also as many professionals and horse owners as possible.
Yeah,
so I think what's clear is there are things that horse owners shouldn't be doing and should be doing, and those can reduce the risk of injury to themselves and to their horses. So shall we have a look at what the presentation for tonight? And you'll join us again at the end, won't you, Laura?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Help answer questions. So
yeah.
Right, let me go back to sharing my screen. And if you are looking to buy a head collar, or if you're in other parts of the world, a halter or a head stall, you're going to be spoilt for choice. There's no doubt about that. It's a very, very common piece of tack, and that's because we suspect that it's used on a very frequent basis. How long have head collars been used on horses? Well, probably ever since first domestication, some sources suggest. So, it's something that's been some form of controlling horses, of how to move them around, has been around for a very, very long time. And in fact, the first possibly patent actually wasn't that long ago. And so this was, it's really hard to imagine that there are actually patents for head collars. As I say, you can see this one here. To be absolutely frank and honest, I haven't actually read what the patent is and why it's so special. But as I say, there probably are, there's a lot more patents on head collars nowadays. In terms of how head collars should be used and the potential risks of using them, this is recognized. So you will see, for example, through the BHS, they have videos on how to put on a head collar. And, it's a fundamental part of managing horses if you are going to try and lead them somewhere or have them under some form of control. You'll also find that a lot of universities, vet schools, colleges, where places where horses are being handled will have what I would call an SOP, a standard operating procedure, for how head collars should be used. And of course, this is aimed at reducing the risk of injury to the horse, but also reducing the risk of injury to the handler as well. This is from one of my colleagues who collaborated on some of the research that you're going to be seeing tonight, Lorna Cameron, who was at Sparsholt College at the time. This is something from their procedures at Sparsholt. Lorna's now at Hartbury University. But some of the key points of their directions for staff and students are no head collars left in stables, turnout only in leather or field safe, loose school in leather head collars advised, travel in leather, not nylon. So there is a sort of recognition of some factors associated with head collar use. But when we start to try and look into this, and this was obviously the starting point when Equilibrium approached me, I think probably now 4 years ago to start this project. If we actually do a search, we end up being quite disappointed because we find very little information. I couldn't find anything really of significance relating to the use of head collars or risk of injury. But of course, we know that there are lots of anecdotes around of horses which have died as a result of being tied up by a head collar. Particularly vets, those working on professional yards, even ordinary horse owners have stories about horses that have had their necks broken or been found sort of asphyxiated from a head collar related sort of incident. And there are some possibly severe consequences of head collar injury, including sort of damage to the nerves and facial paralysis. And a neck fracture is, again, if you talk to vets in practice, this isn't something that they see once in a lifetime. It's actually, unfortunately, probably much more common than that. The sort of things that have been reported by vets are fracture of the atlas. So this is, for example, here at the top where the skull meets the neck. Other fractures, areas where there has been a sort of where the joint has been abnormally disturbed, strangulation. And as I say, Dr. Kirsty Pickles, who was involved in a lot of this research, has come across a number of incidences of horses dying from head collar related injuries. So the first sort of work that I'm going to talk to you about is the survey that we did. And this was with my colleagues, Jane Williams and Kirsty Pickles. And we wanted to try and understand more about how head collars are used and the sort of risk of injury and types of injury and the circumstances of injury. This is the one that I mentioned at the start, which is an open access. Anyone can read this. You can either use this link here, or probably easier to do Marlin head collar horse safety, and you should find that journal. In terms of some of the information we might have which is relevant to understanding how head collars, for example, could injure horses. This was one study that was published fairly recently, a couple of years ago, and I got quite excited when I saw this until I saw the images, and I found that the areas that they were looking at weren't really areas where we would imagine that there potentially could be damage from head collars under circumstances. For example, if horses pull back, we would expect damage, you know, or to the pole, or across the nose, or even underneath the mandible here. But these authors didn't actually study any of the areas where bridles or head collars really sit. So that was slightly disappointing, because these are the areas, of course, where we know that there can be high pressure. This is obviously a bridle, but again, in terms of the areas where we can have pressures, these are fairly similar. And you can see that there are structures, there are nerves, there are blood vessels that can be potentially damaged from high force compression in these areas. And as I say, unfortunately, these are not really related to the areas that this paper studied. So our first approach, as I say, was to launch a survey and to try and find out a little bit more. So this is what we call 17 closed questions, and closed questions mean there are only certain options you can select. We had one question where we asked people to rank different features, one which was an open text question. That means you can write what you want. We didn't ask any questions about age or gender because we didn't consider that to be really relevant. Shared by social media. It wasn't branded as David Marlin. It was done through a third party, and it was incentivized. And that is, we use that to try and avoid getting a biased response. I know there are a lot of people that sort of follow me on Facebook and probably share very similar views, but if I ask that audience, I might not get a true cross-section of horse owners. And incentivization just means that people are more likely to fill in the survey. We got fantastic 5,615 responses. Majority actually from people who said they did dressage at some level. And then the next was pleasure riding. Then we had show jumping and people who were involved in eventing. of course, they may not add up to 100% because people could do more than one discipline. So one of the first questions was, how do you use a head collar? How often, sorry, not how do you, how often do you use a head collar? And you can see here the most common answer was 2 to 4 times a day. There were very few people who never used a head collar. And I'm interested in what they would use to move a horse, say, well, perhaps they didn't need to move horses under control. So the majority of people are using head collars on a daily basis, as you can see here. When we asked about how long do you leave head collars on for, only a very small percentage, 3%, said they kept the head collars on 24/7 most days or all days, which again is what we'd probably expect. The majority used a head collar for less than an hour, but of course, as you know, it only takes about probably less than a few seconds for you to turn your back on a horse and something's happened. So within an hour, there's potentially many opportunities for something to go wrong. And this may, what may go wrong is not necessarily something you've done. There may never have ever have been a loud noise near your stable, but one day a tractor, actually a tractor's a bad example, but let's say a lorry or a car backfires and your horse is startled. And it's not that your horse is flighty, you know, it's just horses will often react to incredibly loud noises, flashes of lightning, anything that could actually upset your horse. In terms of use of head collars, I was surprised that this was so low. Only 14% used them when mucking out. Of course, ideally, from a respiratory point of view, you shouldn't be mucking out the bedding with your horse in the stable, because we know that that creates quite a significant cloud of airborne dust, depending on the bedding, that will take possibly 1 to 2 hours to settle back down. The biggest use was during traveling, leading to and from the field, followed by traveling, followed by grooming and tacking up. So we also learned that 53% of you, or 53% of the 5,615, own more than one head collar. Now, we didn't explore what people were using different head collars for. And that's possibly something we should have done, but that's something we could go back to and look at a different date. Would be why or how are people using head collars in different situations. In terms of the types of head collar used, not really a surprise that leather was the most common. Leather safety, only about 5%. Synthetic was the next, but you can see as a proportion of the people using synthetic, more people, if they were using a synthetic head collar, were using a synthetic safety. And again, very similar for webbing. If people were using a webbing, a higher proportion were using a webbing safety head collar. We asked people about what factors influenced their choice of head collar. And not surprisingly, very highly ranked, or the highest ranked, was fit. Then coming a little way behind was the material, the safety and the durability, then price and appearance, then color, and then brand was the last. Although this is a surprising one, because often brand does seem to rank quite low, but there is some evidence that people do tend to follow a brand that they might might easily be available, or that they might trust. This is possibly, I think, the most staggering statistic out of well, except for the one that's going to come after this, but there was 1,615 reports of horses being injured. Now, we can't say that that means we can't put a percentage on risk of injury, or you know, we can't put numbers on, because this was not specified as the past 12 months. This was just all time, what have you experienced? But And of course, we have to accept that people who have filled in this survey, although it wasn't framed this way, may have been motivated to report injuries to their horses. So people with horses who had been injured could have been much more incentivized to take part in the survey than those that didn't, even though we tried to frame it as we were interested in head collar use in general and not specifically injuries. In terms of where injuries occurred, being tied up outside or being tied up traveling were the highest, followed by the field, and then the lowest was tied up in the stable. And of the ones where they were tied up in the lorry, the majority, just about, was when the lorry was not moving. So that's something to think about, is that the risk seems to be slightly higher, or there is a reasonably significant risk of head collar related incident happening when your horse is tied up, even though you're not traveling. Cause of injury, and again, these weren't really a surprise to us. We did suspect the foot caught might be higher, but it was the head collar being caught on something. So even if people were using baler twine or some sort of safety release device, the head collar could catch on something. And if that's not a safety head collar, then that's not going, even if you've got baler twine or a safety device like, let's say, equipping, that is not necessarily going to help you if the head collar itself gets caught on a hook or a door catch or whatever. And then a similar number, horse pulling back. So head collar caught, horse pulling back accounts for almost 80% of our causes of injury related to head collar use. Types of injuries reported, the most common were cuts, followed by bruising, abrasions, and a small but not insignificant number of fractures. Again, we weren't trying to focus on people who had experienced injuries, so we can't tell, but we hope that this is a reasonably good reflection of a cross-section of the equestrian community. This was I think the staggering fact was that there were 167 horse fatalities reported. And I don't think any of us, I think when we started, we thought, if we got 5,000 responses, we might get 5, 10 fatalities. We certainly didn't expect to have 167 horse fatalities reported. And I think the only perhaps very, very weak consolation, but for those owners who have lost horses in a head collar related incident, you've contributed in a way to this education and raising awareness. So, hopefully something beneficial, may well come out of this. The other surprising fact was that basically in about 1 in 6 of head collar incidents, a person was injured as well. So that's another reason why we want to have good awareness of what are the risks and how to mitigate those, is for horses, but also for yourself. If we look at some of the risks, and this is based on statistics, this is Dr. Jane Williams' area of expertise. If we looked at synthetic head collars, these are non-safety, these are just ordinary synthetic head collars. Horses were 2.7 times more likely on average to be injured compared with being in a leather head collar, 1.8 times more likely to be injured than being in a webbing, and 4 times more likely to be injured than being in a rope head collar. Now, this is, we're looking at this at a very simplistic level, and there are many other factors potentially to consider, which we do in the paper, but we don't have time to discuss these here. But for example, People who are using a rope head collar may well have a different type of horse, may be involved in different activities compared to someone perhaps who has their horses always in leather head collars. So on the surface, this is how we read the data. But as I say, if you look in the paper, we go into much more detail about some of these risks. So what was clear is that, or to us at least, is that safety head collars or safety devices reduce the risk of injury compared to non-safety head collars or devices. And another key take home from this was that the safety head collars are safer than any head collar used with baling twine. And in the second part of the talk, we'll be able to, I think, shed some light on why baling twine may not be the best option as a safety device. So just to summarize this first part of the survey, injury risk was increased by 1.7 times if using a head collar when mucking out. Head collar use during traveling reduced the risk of injury by 30% compared to not having a horse in one. And injury risk was reduced by 20% when using leather or synthetic safety head collars compared to standard head collars of the same material. So basically a leather safety or a synthetic safety reduces the risk compared to a standard head collar in leather or a standard head collar synthetic. So for horse owners or anyone working with horses, how can you tell which head collars are the safest? Well, you can't tell it by looking at them or feeling them. You could if the companies had research and told you, but essentially the way we do this is to pull them apart and see how much force is needed to break them. And primarily we are interested in the force in this direction. So that is when you think about the head collar being caught or the horse being tied up and pulling, then typically we're looking at loading over the pole in more or less a straight line down to the point of attachment. And you can see here, this is the rig. I'll show you in a little bit more detail. This is the schematic on the left. So what we have is a steel frame with a steel tube across the top, and we put the head collar over the top. We then attach this onto a scale which measures force, and then the other end of that is attached onto a 1-ton winch used usually on sort of for winching boats or cars. It's the sort of thing you have on a tow truck. You might wonder what all the bungees are doing. Well, the bungees are to stop metal projectiles flying around my lab, because when these things break, they basically go, bits of metal can fly off like bullets, and I do have some bits of bullets embedded in the wall and in the wood. And I'm just going to show you a little video here. So this is, you can see we've got a leather head collar up here, and you can watch as the load in kilograms is increased in pulses. I wonder if you can guess when it's going to go. Okay, so you probably could see when that went. And can you see this is just hanging on by a thread here? This is broken at the buckle, which they often, that is where they break. I think, what did we get up to? About 186 kilos before that one. That was the next pulse above 186 broke this. So what did we actually test? Well, we got a huge range of different things to try and represent as much as possible of products on the market. So we had 3 different types of baler twine, which we got from one of the big manufacturers. We had the bungee breakaway trailer tie, we had Equiping, we had some Field Safe brands, we had what have we got? Ready to Ride. We had the Stella, where that's the one that Equilibrium had developed. And so you can see a huge range of different products here. And one of the important things is documenting when a product breaks or opens, taking pictures of everything to record exactly what had happened and making notes on that. So here are the results from the range of different products. These are safety head collars or safety devices. And the yellowy orange ones are the safety head collars. The blue ones are standard ones. And what we're looking at here on the left is the force at which these either broke, or if they were safety devices, at which they opened. Now it's in newtons, which we're going to move on to talking about kilograms, but I just wanted to be correct just for the first presentation of the data. So essentially, if you divide newtons by 10, then you get kilograms. So the highest one here, this webbing head collar here, broke at around about 575 kilograms of force. So if your horse weighed 500 and it got caught by its head collar, then potentially you could lift, that horse could be hung by its head collar because the head collar wouldn't break. Then we have the lowest one down here, opening probably, let's look around 150, maybe 25 kilos. So that's quite low. The letters just are the statistics. So columns with different letters are statistically different. And these are averages of at least 3 repetitions. And these are standard deviations, the black bars. So mention that this is newtons to you. So here I'm going to now talk in kilograms. I've converted these into kilograms, and these are safety devices and baler twine. So you can see here fine baler twine breaking at around about 38 kilos, medium baler twine breaking around just below 80, heavy duty up around 135. And the Equiping and the bungee breakaway trailer tie breaking around sort of 80 to sort of 90 kilograms. These are separate presented separately to the head collar here because they aren't in themselves obviously head collars. These are things that you would use in conjunction with a head collar. But if we put these all together in a table, sorry, even in a graph, you can see that we have this huge range at which they break or open. So the orange are standard head collars, the yellow are safety head collars, and the purple are safety devices. Now, in terms of when should these open, that's a really difficult question because we don't want them to open too easily. Of course, if they open really easily, there's no risk of the horse being injured, but you don't want the head collar opening when you're just leading the horse to the field, if the horse isn't doing anything. So you don't want it to open too easily because it won't be usable. On the other hand, if it opens at too high a force, then there's the potential for serious injury to your horse before it actually breaks, and it may not break at all. So where should these be opening? Well, ideally what we don't want is people to be dragged. That's a good place to start. And if we look at a force of around 70 to 80 kilos, that is probably a good starting point because it means, first of all, a person shouldn't be dragged. It's also, we know in relation to the horse's body weight, probably a force on the pole that the horse could sustain without serious injury. Now, these ones up here at the top are generally webbing or nylon. So really these should not be used without some sort of safety device. There's some other things to consider as well though, and that is how consistent these devices are in breaking or opening. And this percentage here is an indicator. We call this the coefficient of variation. It's an indicator of how consistent the device or head collar was at opening. And what we would like to see is below about 10%. And you can see a lot of these products are actually quite variable. And this was one of the most worrying, that was the baler twine was very variable. Now, medium, for some reason, medium baler twine was acceptable, but both the fine and the heavy duty were very variable in the load at which they broke. So you could have one time with fine baler twine when it opened, let's say at 50 kilos, and another time when perhaps it opened at 150 kilos. And we don't really understand why that was, but it was a consistent finding. Whether it's something to do with the manufacturing process, I don't know. But as I say, it was really too variable. And why that's dangerous is because you don't know what effect you're going to get. You don't know if it's going to open at 30 or whether it's going to open at 90. So ideally what we're looking for are safety devices or head collars or safety head collars that open below at least 100 kilos, but also have less than 10% variation, so that they are fairly consistent in the way they behave. And the ones that met this criteria were the Stellar Headcollar, which is in two positions. The position A is a lower opening force because it doesn't have the keeper in place. This one opens slightly higher. And then baler twine medium and the Libby's field safe were the ones that on these criteria at least would be most suitable. If you want to read this in more detail, unfortunately this paper, which describes the testing and the results, isn't open access. It is in a peer-reviewed journal, but unfortunately it wasn't possible to publish this in a suitable open access journal. So unfortunately, if you want to read this, you would have to buy a copy of the paper or get it through an academic institute. So to summarize, first of all, risks: being tied up outside, tied up, traveling, even if the vehicle isn't moving, and in the field. Major causes: head collar being caught or the horse pulling back. And safety head collars are significantly lower risk than conventional head collars, at least in our survey. This is all based on the data that we've obtained in the first study, the survey study. And then for the second study, we see that the safety head collars open at a lower force than standard head collars break at. Baler twine can be very variable and doesn't appear to be consistently safe, apart from the medium baler twine, which we tested here. And of course, this is something most of you will know, that webbing nylon is extremely strong and could contribute to an increased risk of injury if not used with some sort of safety release device. And baler twine may not be the best option for that either. So for the last part of the presentation, before we take your questions, I'm just going to review the Stella Headcollar, which was launched a couple of years ago now. And this is a head collar that Equilibrium designed based on some of the research I undertook, and this is a product that I helped test, and I tested hundreds and hundreds of prototypes and lots of different types of fasteners, and some of the products were tested 30, 40 times and in different ways until there was a consistently reliable product. Part of what we did, I'm not going to take you through the whole of the development process, but one of the important things was to try to understand what forces were over the horse's poll during normal use. So here we're looking at some force over time recordings of horses being led, being tied up in the stable. These are normal activities without the horse panicking, and we're looking at what sort of forces are involved here. And these are some pressure map tracings here when we were using the test rig to pull the head collars apart. And you can see that we get up to here across the pole or the metal tube, pressures of 500 kilopascals. Now that's about 10 times the pressure that would cause damage to your horse's back muscles if it was sustained pressure over the horse's back. So using a combination of this sort of data, the product was developed, the product was launched, and what we've done just recently so that we could present on this webinar is to get some feedback from owners who have had the Equilibrium Stellar and have been using it. Now these are not people who have been paid, this is an anonymous survey, and say we just launched this out yesterday to try and get some data. We got 70 responses. It's a small sample, that's the first thing to say, but we had a spread of ownership time, so we can say pretty much 60% of these people had owned one for more than 6 months. Most people were using their head collar 2 to 4 times a day, then either at least once a day, and then 2 to 3 times a week. Where people were saying they were using them, again, probably shouldn't be any surprise. The majority were using them when leading, tied up outside, tied up inside, tied up traveling, tied up to a trailer or a lorry, and then the least number were in the field. And of course, you know, we would always recommend that it's better not to have a head collar on a horse in the field. That really does, you know, avoid any risk of injury whatsoever. Of course, we know that there are horses where this is unfortunately a necessity because they are difficult to catch. So about 60% of people had not experienced their head collar releasing in the event of an incident, but about 25% it had released once, and about 12% it had released several times. We asked people, do you believe the Stellar Headcollar has avoided or reduced the risk or severity of injury? These were the people where the head collar had opened, and we had about 32% strongly agree or agree, and we've got about 33% undecided as to whether it reduced the risk. Where the incidents occurred, again, field, as we know, is a risk. Tied up outside, we saw that in the survey as well. Tied up inside, interestingly, was low in the survey, but you can see here. Remember, these are relatively small numbers though still. But none of the respondents reported any obvious injuries to horses in any of these incidents. That's really the good thing. So just to summarize, the majority of owners are using head collars on a daily basis. Most people have leather or then synthetic and then webbing. Only around 17% of people are using safety head collars or safety devices. Most of the injuries are occurring when tied up, pulling back or the head collar itself getting caught. And that would, again, the head collar getting caught, a baler twine possible or another release device attached to your head collar, attached to a lead rope, is going to work potentially if your horse pulls back. It's not going to help if the head collar itself gets caught on something. And as you can see, that seems to be just pretty much as high a risk as pulling back. Cuts and bruising are the most common head collar related injuries. And we saw that in around 1 in 6 of these, a person was injured as well as the horse. The synthetic non-safety head collars appear to carry the highest risk of injury. And it doesn't seem that baler twine is a reliable safety option. We haven't gone on to test lots of other baler twines, but, and I hate to say this, anecdotally, there are a lot of reports of people saying the baler twine didn't work. So unfortunately, it's not really possible to assess the safety of a head collar or device or safety device just from looking at it. You need a little bit more than that. You need really some evidence of what it's going to open at. And of course, to be honest, if you bought a safety collar, head collar or a safety device and you got a weight and you dropped it, you could see if that opened or not. You'd have to do a little bit of maths. If you were going to drop it, you'd have to take the weight and you'd have to take the distance you dropped it and calculate the acceleration and therefore the force in newtons and then divide it by 10. So it's not necessarily that straightforward. So I think we probably should just stick to saying you can't really tell without looking at the table that I've presented earlier on, or you know, or if the manufacturer has done some testing. So safety head collars or devices must open before injury occurs, but they mustn't open in normal use. And that's where setting this threshold at which they open is key. And remember, we want them to open reliably. And at least based on this small sample, after 2 years on the market, the Stellar Headcollar appears to be associated, I think, with a lower risk of injury. There's lots of anecdotes out there as well. And I know that Equilibrium are interested in trying to collect more data, excuse me, on the Stellar Headcollar, because there's been a lot more than 70 sold. So just like to finish by acknowledging my co-workers. Research is very rarely a single person, and I work with a great team on these 2 projects. Lorna Cameron, who was at Sparsholt College, Lorna's now at Hartbury University, Roberta Godoy, who's at Writtle, Dr. Jane Williams, my long-term collaborator and fantastic statistics and epidemiology expert, and Dr. Kirsty Pickles, who is a vet and is at Nottingham Vet School. So thank you very much. And let's get Laura back. Hi, Laura, you're muted at the moment.
Yeah.
You're now not muted.
Great.
So, I mean, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, you know, this, and as a horse owner myself, and as a horse owner who has had Stella do its job with my horse deciding to sort of get itself into a bit of a pickle, you know, we are really, really passionate about this product, and we are really keen that we, as you said at the beginning, really educate horse owners on the risks. You know, horses do get themselves in situations. What I think I really urge people, and anyone who came to see the presentations that we did at Your Horse Live, you know, the one thing I was really keen to stress is that when we think about a head collar, let's not prefix it with a field safe head collar. Let's just talk about a safe head collar, because quite often, and funnily, my niece is a horse owner, and just tonight she said, what are you doing this evening? And I told her, and she said, oh, the field head collar. And you know, after I slapped her around the chops and said, no, not the field head, you know, the head collar. That's what I'd really like people to kind of understand, that it is about, as you saw in the survey, loads of different places where accidents happen, tied up outside the stable because the scary plastic bag comes around the corner, tied up in the lorry because, you know, their friend disappears off and they're left on their own. So for us, it's not just about that head collar that is only used for the horses that either can't be catched, as you mentioned, or of course horses that perhaps need the muzzle protector or perhaps need a muzzle on them. You know, it is about the everyday that often, as we saw in the survey, is really where the danger points can happen. So that's kind of, for me, the core thing that I was really keen, and hence why some of the materials were chosen and the design of the product, so that it can kind of hang on the gate and 2 years later, you know, still look like you could wash it and take it to a show and it still do its job.
And yeah, and I think, you know, you highlighted that, and it's really important to I think to try and get this point across, is that accidents happen.
Yeah.
Accidents happen a lot more than people probably realize. You know, we're not scaremongering here. If you talk to vets, they treat a lot of horses that have injuries. And what I think we have here is some of the risk factors to suggest, you know, how you might reduce your risk, because, yeah, you know, you might have had your horse 5 years, your horse might be bomb proof, but, you know, jets go over, you know, you get a sonic boom, you know, somebody doesn't think your horse is in the box and throws a bale of shavings, you know, things happen. And
yeah.
and accidents are generally split second.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of the feedback that I get when I'm talking to horse owners and retailers, I deal with a lot of our UK sort of trade customers who are also horse owners. And, you know, one of the things they always talk about, everybody's got a story. I've got my own story. I'm just thankful my horse that day had his Stellar on, because, you know, he was tied up to the lorry. He is quiet. He was minding his own business. He looked up. I happened to have the tack locker open. The lead rope went underneath the tack locker. He said, oh, why am I suddenly restricted? Pulled back. And luckily I had the Stellar on. Head collar dropped to the floor. Horse looked slightly confused. I was thankful that he had the Stellar on, because I had a safe horse and I didn't have a big bill for a new lorry door. And, you know, that was just, like you say, the blink. I just turned around to grab my saddle, and the next minute, you know, something has happened. And we hear that all the time, you know, something very small.
One the occasion I remember was at the Animal Health Trust, a clinical case that was in the stocks for endoscopy, and there was Dr. Colin Roberts and myself. We had really experienced staff in there, and the horse, basically it just had a head collar on, and the horse put its head to one side and caught it on basically a catch, and as it went and felt the catch, it then just pulled its head violently, smacked its head on the other side of the stocks, and then absolutely completely destroyed a set of Loddon wood stocks. You know, you wouldn't believe it, the damage.
And in such a quick amount of time. Yeah. And I always say to horse owners, in the wild, this is how horses stay alive. Yeah. Something comes towards them, what do? Run. If they didn't, they would get eaten by whatever it is running towards them. So they are flight animals. You know, they don't assess risk like we do. You know, something happens, they feel a restriction, and their immediate response is some level of flight. And obviously some horses have got more level of flight in them than others, and I guess that's why for some horses they get really in a tricky position, because, you know, I had an incident quite recently with mine where he got caught into a fence, and not head collar related, leg related, and he didn't panic. So, but if he still had to be cut out. But you know, it's that very, very quick thing, isn't it, that is something so small at the time that clearly when we got the survey back, at the worst end of the scale ends in a horse that, you know, loses their life. And, you know, if we can save one horse's life, if we can save one horse from injury, and I know we've done that because I have people walk up to me and tell me when I work our trade stands at Your Horse Live, can I just tell you XYZ? You know, I know we've done that, but, you know, we want to spread that message and help more horses. And of course, not forgetting horse owners, because in the survey, as you've already talked about, you know, horse owners get injured too. So, you know, we're part of the bargain, aren't we? We're the ones fetching and carrying the horses from the, not fetching them literally, but, you know, we're leading them to the field, we're putting them in the lorry. So it stands to reason if the horse gets in trouble, there could be a horse owner desperately trying to do something to release themselves, and of course putting themselves in harm's way, because we would all do that to make sure our horse is free of the problem, and then we get injured too. And again, you know, that's, we're about the well-being of the horse, but indirectly we want to make sure that horse owners are okay too, because we're all horse owners. So
they can't look after their horses if they're injured.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
One of the things that we know from all of the development and pulling apart hundreds and hundreds of head collars is occasionally, and we know from in-use trials as well, occasionally the poppers get damaged.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean it hasn't worked. It means it has worked, but in some circumstances that it's not unexpected that the poppers get damaged. If the poppers get damaged, it's likely, and it's broken, it's likely saved your horse in any case.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about the very nature of the way the product has been designed, it's been designed to release under a fixed amount of pressure. So as you've rightly pointed out, it was about the right balance for the horse. For the horse, you want it as low as possible, but for the horse owner and safety, it needs to be, you know, on higher. And we settled with the 83 kilograms, but, you know, often a sort of minor incident. So the issue I personally had with my horse, for example, the head collar dropped, no poppers, there was no shearing of poppers, no significant sort of, you know, it was just a very minor incident that probably was quite close towards the breaking point of the head collar. So it's reusable, but we do hear instances where, of course, there's more significant damage to the horse. And the first thing we would say is, thank God the horse was wearing the Stella, because potentially we have saved quite a nasty situation. But of course, all of our products, you know, come with a 12-month guarantee. And so if anyone has had, you know, their Stella where the poppers have done their job, that's the reason the product was bought, we will absolutely, if the product is in that 12-month period, we will replace that head collar piece, the head piece, you know, free of charge. But importantly, we know by doing that, we have saved a horse from potentially, whether it be an invisible injury or a visible injury. But the thing I always try and remind people is, if poppers have broken and if there's significant damage to that headpiece, imagine had it have been the head collar that perhaps you replaced, because, you know, we can very, very easily replace a headpiece on a head collar. It's much harder to replace, you know, the horse that suffered, you know, potentially quite unnecessary injury.
And okay, and if they're outside that 12-month period, they can they buy replacement pieces?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got, you know, we've got brilliant customer care team. So Claire heads up our customer care team. She'll talk to horse owners all day long. So if there is anyone watching that's had an incident where, you know, whether poppers or keepers, please get in touch with Claire. You know, we'll be really fair. If it's outside of the guarantee period and it's the headpiece, you're able to purchase them. If it's just the little keepers, we will put those in the post, you know, free of charge. So yeah, if anyone is kind of watching that's had that, then absolutely get in touch. But remember that the most important thing is that if there is any kind of significant damage in there, then Stella's kind of earned its keep. But we want to make sure that people continue to use their head collars, you know, long term, and don't revert back to perhaps a slightly more unsafe option.
So basically, if it does release, check the poppers just to make sure there's no visible damage. And if
yeah, absolutely,
they can take a picture and send it to you, and you're
yeah,
okay,
absolutely, yeah.
all right. So Sarah Bowen, we've got some questions here. Can you tell us what the breaking strain is of normal? Okay, I think we've done that one. Yeah, you were very quick off the mark, Sarah, but hopefully we've answered that one for you. This might be one for you, I think. The next one, Laura, is the synthetic head collar material the smooth biothane type? Webbing is a synthetic nylon webbing.
Is that referencing the head? I think that came in whilst you were talking.
Yeah, that was
about the testing, David, rather than Stellar itself.
Right. Yeah, it did. You're right. It was around. I don't really know. Not quite sure how to, because we're not quite sure what you're referring to. Can you just clarify that for us, and we'll make sure we answer that. Jill Holden. Thank you, Jill. It's very kind. Have you ever looked at the Idolo tether tie? No, but what we will be doing is looking at some more new safety devices as they come on the market, and other products. You know, we're always interested in these. That's one of the things we do in our community. I don't know if you're a member or not, but members get to suggest the things that we should be testing. Samantha Wakes. Hi, Samantha. Thank you very much. That's very kind. You've got two questions. I don't know. Let's see. The aim is to reduce injury, which is in part down to the breaking strain. However, what impact does the design of a head collar, e.g. padded pole, have in limiting injury? Would, for example, a specific design with a higher breaking point produce the same injury to a non-padded head collar with a lower breaking point? That's a really interesting one. And it's actually a very good question, because it was one of the things we talked about in the development of Stella, was whether that headpiece should be padded or not. Now, it is actually padded, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yeah. And a little bit, I always sort of think about, you know, heels. And, you know, if you walk on grass with a stiletto heel, your heel is much more likely to sink than if you walk on grass with a sort of square heel. And the way that the Stella has
made of the same material, exactly.
Yeah, exactly the same material. You're going to sink because the weight coming through is through a much smaller surface area. So we have designed the Stella with some padding for comfort for exactly that reason, because if you can spread, you know, not only do you want to make sure that the head collar is safe, you want to make sure it's comfortable, but should there become a problem and Stella is going to need to kind of whip into action and release, clearly by having some padding and a wider area, you are able to kind of help also not just, you know, eliminate the injury, but to be able to potentially then help, you know, just reduce the effects. The question about the keeper, yeah, absolutely. The keepers are there to serve a purpose. So when you remove the keeper, obviously you can pop open the Stella if you're putting it over the horse's head. But we always then suggest that you then, once you put it back onto the horse's head, for Stella to do, you know, for the results that we've seen in the testing, you want to make sure that those keepers are in place and they don't come down over the under the poppers or over the poppers, but they sit just above. Don't pull them sort of below. And again, we've seen some horse owners do that, and we just sort of give that feedback to make sure they're in the right place.
Okay. And yeah, the point you're making, Samantha, I think, is that, you know, basically, if we have a force on that area, then we get a certain pressure. If we have the same force, or think of weight over double the area, then we have half the pressure. So and the material you have underneath also helps in how evenly that pressure is distributed. But it's a tricky, over the pole, it is tricky, because even if you have a really wide sort of headpiece, if it comes down to two narrow pieces at the end, then it's not going to help. And that sort of physics or misunderstanding of physics has been used in a lot of girths, where the girths are nice and wide, but they come down to two narrow points, and so the force is actually through the middle.
Yeah, the pressure's got to go somewhere, hasn't it? It is worth pointing out as well, David, that you know, we do have some top international event riders that are our sort of sponsored riders and ambassadors, and one of the questions that we did get asked, and you'll remember this, David, because I asked you, was about putting fleece on the head collar. So there's you know, when horses are traveling internationally, that's a thing that people like to do, and the advice that, you know, you rightly imparted to me to impart to them was that you can so you can put a fleece put some fleece padding on the top of the head collar should you want to. Just make sure that it steers clear of the safety mechanism, because of course that wasn't tested, was it? So we weren't able to say whether that would make a difference, but the advice is if you want to, you can, but just keep it away from the poppers.
Okay, Jill. Oh, so Jill, you are a member. Brilliant. Well, get on the Facebook group and suggest that one, and let you know, again, any of the members, if you want to suggest after the webinar tonight, go in and in the closed Facebook group and just start suggesting what's going to be the next things we're going to test. And your question, another question, Jill, what combination of head collar and safety tie do you recommend? A safety tie rather than baler twine. Well, I think the equipping and the equipping is the small plastic one that goes between the lead rope and the head collar. That didn't come out too badly. The only problem with it is it's only going to protect against the pulling back. It's not going to protect against the situation where the head collar gets caught. And remember, 40% of the incidents were the head collar getting caught on something, 40% were being pulling back. So you would be reducing your risk if you just used a safety device like the equipping. I'd have to look at the data again. Let me just have a quick look. Because funny enough, I don't hold all these figures in my head. Let's see, what do we, the equipping was quite variable actually, I think, as I remember. Yeah, it was about 25% coefficient of variation, which is quite high. I mean, medium baler twine from Agritel was okay, but you know, I can't really translate that to any other type of baler twine, because they're all, although we only reported the Agritel ones, we did test some others in there, and there's no such thing as a standard baler twine really. And the bungee breakaway again is in the right sort of range, but it's only going to help you with pulling back. It's not going to help you when in the situation where the head collar itself gets caught. And of course it was almost 38% coefficient of variation, so it wasn't particularly reliable. So yeah, you probably, at least based on the data I have, you haven't got too many choices. Helen Springett, was the Stella head collar tested with a pull on the noseband? Fortunately, my leather head collar broke, but my horse got the noseband caught in the trailer and panicked, but the leather snapped quite easily. Okay. I'd be surprised. I mean, cheap leather, I hope I'm not offending you. Cheap leather does break at, what, about 200? Yeah, about 200, 220 cheap leather. Good leather could be 400 or 500. So we have looked at pulling in different places, but to be honest, the majority of the situations where it gets caught or where there's a pull, it's over the pole where it breaks. So often it breaks at these, whatever happens, it breaks at the buckles or cheek pieces. Sometimes it does break at the ring at the bottom. Okay, let's see what else we've got.
It's also worth adding, David, if I may, that the one of the concerns that, again, I get when I talk to customers about, you know, when we're talking through Stella, is this idea that because it's got safety in there, that perhaps it's going to release too low and then create an issue. And one of the things that I'm really keen to explain to people is that when you lead a horse, of course, there are times when it's not coming from the nose pressure, but, you know, a fresh winter's morning where limited turnout perhaps is on the cards for a lot of horse owners, you know, they get to the field a bit quicker than they do in the summer because the horse is keen to get out. And of course, at the point when you're leading, a lot of that is coming through nose pressure. And so obviously when we were doing the testing, as you say, rightly so, from a testing perspective, most of the incidents were coming sort of through the pole with pulling back and getting stuck, etc. On a purely practical level, to have a head collar that is systematically releasing under nose pressure could go back to what we said right at the beginning, which is trying to find the balance between horse and owner and the safety piece.
Yeah.
Which was another reason, wasn't it, where not only do the bulk of the accidents come from pole pressure, but from a day-to-day usage, you want something that if I'm leading my horse and he's dragging me to the field because he's been in for 2 days because of the rain, that I can potentially, if needs to, hold on and say, wait for me, and know that the safety mechanism, because I'm
behind and
yeah, because you'll be behind, exactly. And so what we have to do as a manufacturer is balance all of those things around the horse well-being, what data tells us, etc. And then adding in, and as you said, Stella was tested, and one of the things that we did with the testing was to put it into field trials and make sure that that release point is right. So there is a practical element to it not coming through the nose, and that's the more day-to-day leading, which we know is a primary use for a head collar, and not creating a problem that there wasn't an incident. It's just the horse was keen to get going.
So Heather, who was talking about the noseband, she's just added it was quite an old leather head collar, so probably quite weak. So.
Yeah, that's the other thing, isn't it, is that there's what something might do new and what something will do over a period of time. And of course, with leather particularly, it can start to crack and become much weaker, which obviously in this instance probably helped that horse get free a little easier, you know, as much as you don't want a sort of damaged horse or head collar in this instance. Perhaps if it was a new head collar, the story might have had a slightly different twist to it. Okay.
Now, so the person who had the question about synthetic and webbing has clarified and saying, I just wanted to clarify what you meant by synthetic and webbing. I wasn't sure what you meant by each, as I would think nylon webbing could be described as synthetic. Yeah, in webbing, we are talking about woven nylon that makes a web versus something like biothane, which is that isn't a webbing effect type product. I don't know. Do you say what the Stellar is made out of? Do you?
PVC.
Okay, so yeah, so technically you are right. They are both nylon and PVC would be considered synthetic compared with, say, leather. But yeah, so what we're talking about is really two types of synthetic, one which is either like PVC or biothane, and the other which is woven nylon.
We opted for the materials that we did with Stella, particularly for durability. So often as horse owners, we have the show head collar that we, you know, roll out for shows, and we wanted something that could be used day to day in the fields if need be, at the gate of the field if that's where you leave your head collars as you bring your horse to and from the field, and then at the weekend give it a quick clean and it looks perfectly good to go to a show. And so it stands the test of time of, you know, being out all day, perhaps in all weather, particularly the weather we've been having recently, and leather obviously left outside can potentially not look as good a year or even 6 months on. So the materials,
I like low maintenance. I really
yeah,
like.
Yeah.
Okay, Amber Hully. Hi there. Sometimes my horse can be very strong going to and from the field. Yep. And when leading, he can rear at times. Would the head collar give if he reared? I'm keen to purchase one, but just cautious that I wouldn't want to lose him on a showground too, as he's generally quite flighty and would flee. And that, you know, this is one of the things we have talked about, is there may be circumstances with particular horses where you would want to use a non-safety head collar and take the risk. And that might be, you know, in the circumstances you describe, or, you know, potentially loading horses on the tarmac at an airport. You know, I might accept being dragged for a bit rather than releasing, unloading horses on the side of the road. I don't know. It's kind of about balancing risk. I think if the horse rears and it's unlikely, if you're down below and the horse is up and the horse's nose is up there, that's not, if you're in front of the horse and you're pulling like this, then possibly. But if you're by the horse and you're pulling on the nose, then from our testing, it's not likely to give too easily. Yeah, I think it's all about risk. You know, you might decide that you would want to have him in a non-safety head collar at a show in that situation, but at home or when traveling, you would use a safety head collar. You know, it depends. It depends how your horse's behaviour is at other times, I think, as well, and what the risk of potentially an injury is. I think that's a tricky one to answer. Here's one for you, Laura, from Sarah Bone. The website mentions a Stellar lead rope. Does that have a break-in safety element, or is it just a nice lead rope that matches?
Well, it is a lovely lead rope, and it does match. It does have a lower release breaking point than other lead ropes on the market. So it's important to say that you know, the lead rope is there to provide a matching option, but it releases at about 130 kilograms. So one of the things that is worth considering for horse owners, of course, is that there are times. So the survey that we did was all about head collars. But of course, there are times when one or other aren't at play. So we've heard awful stories of accidents in the field where, of course, it's just the head collar. And then there are other instances where, you know, they're tied up, and of course there's baling twine involved and lead rope. So the lead rope will release at about 130. And the reason that we went, the reason that we bought the Stellar head collar the lead rope more than just having something to match, was you never know what scenario the horse is going to get themselves into. So there is almost another option. And of course, as we've described, it depends in which angle the horse is pulling and all of those things. So it is there, it does match. It does release at about 130, which is, you know, lower than others on the market. It just gives us another option to try and do as much as we can to keep the horse
fail safe, isn't it? If
fail safe, yeah.
For any reason didn't open, the lead rope should.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, in the instance where the lady was talking about pressure from the nose, again, you've got something else there into the mix.
Okay.
I saw a question around a little tiny pony as well.
Yeah.
So it depends how small the little, I think it said 8 hands, does it say?
There's a couple there. There's foals under a year old and 8-hand pony. Yeah.
So we go through size range of extra small through to extra large, and we tend to work on bridle sizes as the indicator. So depending on how small the 8-hand pony or pony's head is, would depend on if extra small goes small enough. Specifically, I don't think the question was, do we do a foal slip? We currently don't have a foal option, but David, you can probably the answer in, because we did test a foal slip, didn't we, in the testing?
Yeah, well, let me have a yeah, I mean, a leather foal slip was 120.
Yeah,
you know, on a 50-60 kilo foal, that's going to be, you know, well, any foal under 120 kilos is.
yeah, I remember that statistic as being one that sort of made me yeah, balk a little bit, because the breaking point is often heavier than the whole of the, you know, foal in its entirety.
Yeah, I mean, having seen that, I wouldn't want to use leather foal slips on young foals. I'd much rather use a, you know, the smallest Stella, you know,
yeah,
without the keeper in place.
Yeah, yeah, to give it the.
Yeah, we haven't tested that, but that, I would say that's a safer option.
Yeah.
Okay, that's an interesting. There's one for you, Laura. What would be the expected life of a Stellar Headcollar in daily use?
Wow. So I think there's a couple of factors at play there. You know, when we develop a product, we want to develop a product that does the sort of what it says on the tin, but that it also has a sustainable lifespan of product. And actually this weekend, a lady at my yard came to me and said, oh, I'm not sure if you'll be pleased to know, but I've got some stretch and flex in the cupboard. She said, I've had them a while. And I said, oh, can I have a look? And she's got a range of the stretch and flex, which are our training and flat wet wraps. And one of these pairs of boots are used every single day, and they are 17 years old. And I took a picture of them because I said, I know this is very geeky, but can I take a picture for my work and put them into the group chat? And then we played a competition as to how old are these. So Stella's obviously been on the market for 2 years. It is made of a durable material, and it's made of a material that you know, lasts, and the materials were specifically chosen for the durability. So, you know, for me, my Stella is one of the originals that we had from the testing, and you know, I can't say it's had too many cleaning days in it, and it's looking as good as new. So it's a really difficult question for me to answer in terms of how long would I expect it to last, because in reality, all of our products are built to last, and we hear time and time again about 17 years of a stretch and flex wrap, 12 years for massage pads, etc., etc. But they were designed to last. Of course, as we've already said, you know, the only sort of caveat to that will be that should Stella have a situation where the poppers are you know, severely damaged, then that would be slightly different. But as a manufacturer, if you're spending your hard-earned cash on a product, we want it, you know, to last, and you know, therefore we would expect it to last, you know, several years, because, you know, of the materials that we've chosen. So I know it's not an exact answer, but it's really difficult to say, because, you know, we see just lots of our products going on for years and years.
Okay. What else? So Sarah Thorne, surely there is an added strength when leather head collars have webbing to reinforce where the leather attaches to the buckles. Yeah, absolutely. And that is possibly why we see them often break around the buckle. So I think, yeah, I think the video I showed you was a leather head collar breaking at the buckle. So sometimes it's the buckles, sometimes it's the leather, but yeah, absolutely. So, and that's why it's really hard. I can't just say leather head collars will break at this. If it's really high quality leather with reinforcements, that could be 600-700 kilos. If it's a cheap leather without
reinforcement.
It could be, 200-300.
And often that webbing and things is put on for styling, isn't it? So I have, I know someone who thought she had leather, came to the webinar, to the presentation we did at Your Horse Live, and then inspected her head collar, and it was only when she turned it over that she realized there was the reinforcement that you're talking about that had all been added for stylizing. But in her head, she owned a leather head collar, and actually in reality, when you broke it down, it was quite different, which would have made it very difficult to say to her, of the scale in which we looked at, where might it be breaking, but likely to be on the higher end because of course of all the reinforcements that are there. The reinforcements are there almost through the nature of the word to reinforce the breaking, aren't they? Which in the horse's instance is obviously the downside.
And I think, to be fair, and I don't think Equilibrium would claim this, that, this isn't the answer to every possible risk of a horse, but the evidence suggests that this is safer than a lot of the other things. And if you combine that with knowledge of where the risks are, then, even if you're not using an Equilibrium Stellar Headcollar, there's good information here to help you hopefully reduce the risk to your horse and reduce the risk to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, for us, the first point was actually just to do the research in the first place. So, the survey that, that was undertaken was really, that was as important as then developing the product to kind of bring to the forefront to horse owners. We know accidents happen, but perhaps when you see it in black and white, you might be that little bit more careful, or you might consider things a little bit differently. I know when I looked at where the accidents happened, the difference, because often when we talk about, because it was in the context of head collars, we think field, and actually it was more likely to be tied up outside the stable, and then the differences with traveling. So I think for us there's almost the two parts, which is helping horse owners to have a better understanding of where risks and accidents can happen, and just being aware of that's important, because you may decide to put your wheelbarrow around the corner, you may decide to do something different in terms of your choices on a daily basis with your horse. And then secondly to that, to understand that our products are not the answer to all things. As we've said, if you're loading your horse at the side of the motorway, or taking him off if it's a long journey traveling, or at the airport, as you've said, then you absolutely want to do everything in your power to keep hold of the horse, and not have the option. But of course there are other scenarios where you want. So I think for us it's about that education, and hopefully things like today allow horse owners just to kind of have a better understanding, share that with their friends. And ultimately, what does it boil down to? It boils down to whether it's something that somebody's heard today, or a friend tells them. I saw one of the questions was around baling twine, but it was specifically so that she could feed back to her yard why she doesn't want her horse tied up on baling twine. So looking for that sort of voice of authority for to have that permission to go back to the yard to say, please don't do this, because and it's not just based on a whim, it's not just because I'm anti-baling twine, it's because there's proven research that suggests I could get my horse in, my horse could get into trouble. And I think all of these things really help that, which is why it's really important for us, regardless of what head collar a horse owner decides to use, that understanding is really what we try and support. And of course this is not just head collars, this is with our boots and our leg protection and our massage pads. It is really just about empowering. We can share information across the world, we're all in different parts of the country, and these types of things allow us to get to audiences to be able to kind of have that conversation. And I know that's something that certainly you do on a daily and weekly basis, not just with things we do, but with all of the everything that you're doing.
Here is that the information that from all of this is in the public domain. There's nothing to stop other manufacturers going out and using that information to to develop appropriate products. So, you know, it's not just, you know, you're not just keeping it to yourself. It's actually in the public domain. Anyone can use this information. And at the end of the day, we, you know, just if we can reduce the number of injuries, because we know horses just, they have this ability, don't they, to cost you a huge amount of money. And just you think, how did that happen? You know, like, I only looked over there and I looked back and the horse is like missing half a leg.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing, actually, just to go back to one of the questions about the lady who had the horse that was rearing. The other point just to consider in terms of where our head collar releases, so I think your advice was right, just something to add was, short of the horse owner getting lifted off the ground at the same time, depending of course on how heavy the person is, you're unlikely to get to that 83 kilograms worth of force, because of course as the horse is, you know, going up. So it is a consideration. One of the team is watching and she just she just messaged me to say there is the consideration of, you know, you're not being lifted off the floor, so therefore you're not potentially getting to that pressure point. And
the other thing we didn't really go into, because for a lot of people this would be way too much, you know, GCSE physics, but if you weigh 70 kilos, which is 700 newtons when you're standing still, if your horse goes up and accelerates and pulls you at 2G, which is, you know, twice the acceleration of gravity. So 2G isn't actually that much of a pull, but if your horse pulls you at 2G, your mass effectively becomes double. So that means that instead of having 70 kilos on the head collar, you've got 140 kilos on the head collar, which is when it would break, which would prevent you from getting injured.
I remember as a child, and I'm not sure if this is true, David, you'll probably say absolutely not, but I was told as a child, if you dropped a penny off the Eiffel Tower and it hit somebody on the head, that it could kill them because of what you've just described. So I don't know whether it's scientifically true, but I think it explains the theory.
I think it would hurt.
Yeah, yeah, I remember it quite clearly from a school trip, just in terms of understanding force dropping down. So whether the actual fact is right, I think it's an unscientific explanation of
definitely reach a terminal velocity.
Yeah,
we'd have to work out what that would weigh, but yeah, it'd be...
I'm not going to stand at the bottom of the Eiffel Tower while you throw pennies on my head.
No fun. All right, well look, I think we've exhausted all, not exhausted, but we've answered all the questions. One last comment there: we use hemp baler twine, but it gives way too easily. There you go, there's your answer. Okay, well look, brilliant. Well look, thank you all for joining, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it informative. You know, you can, if you do have any questions that you think of after the webinar, you could post them and we'll try and get Laura or one of her team to answer them.
Yeah, absolutely. We're on Facebook and Instagram, so if anyone's got any product specific questions, pick up the phone or message us. You know, we're more than happy to give advice and answer any questions specifically around sizing or anything really, around not just Stella but any other products. Yeah, we're more than happy.
Just we can finish on that on a point, which is some people say, why do equilibrium always seem to come up really well in your tests? Well, it is because equilibrium as a company does spend money on R&D. So I think your first product was the nose net with Daniel Mills for head shakers.
Yeah.
Your UV mask, which you didn't know I was testing. Yours was the only UV mask that met its claims. Much UV was blocked.
The UV blocking, yeah.
Been involved in the development of you know, stretch and flex and trizone.
Yeah.
And if people haven't seen that, we've got all of those results are actually on the website. The UV mask testing, and the boot testing, cross-country boot testing. But you know, the reason you come out top is nothing sinister. It's just because as a company you spend money on R&D, and I wish more companies would do it. I'm always,
and it is what we hold, you know, it is really the DNA of what we're about. You know, our strap line is making a difference to horses' lives, and it's very difficult to do that if you don't research and develop your products. And so, you know, we are absolutely passionate about that, and you know, we are working on other products that we are testing and developing, but for us really it is all about standing the test of time in terms of our products. You know, Stretch and Flex has been on the market over 15, well, this lady owns a pair that are 17 years old. They're this, you know, we developed them 18, 19 years ago, and they still stand the test of time now, the Trizone boots. So for us, it is, I think, you know, all about that education, but yeah, it is really what is at the center of how we develop a product. We take a problem from a horse owner and we create a product that will help that horse owner, or we look at a product that exists on the market and we say, how do we improve on that? And then we research and we test, and you know, we put things in labs and we blow things up and we hit things with hammers and all of that stuff until we say, do you know what, from a testing perspective this works. And of course we can get products that absolutely stand up to the testing, but then we decide they might not be commercially viable, or they take several years to develop. But for us it is about, you're right, you know, the reason that we come through so strong in the testing is because that's at the center of what we're about and what we do. And you know, absolutely, as a horse owner, I would love to see other brands kind of getting involved in doing more of that, but we will continue to sort of bang the drum on horses and horse well-being. And we know that we've got, you know, a loyal following of customers that love the fact that they know it's been tested, and if we say it has this breaking point or it has this breathability, then people know that we can substantiate it, and that's the most important thing.
Brilliant. Well, look, I think that's a good point to finish on. Thanks very much, Laura, for joining us, and
thank you for having us.
Pleasure, and thanks to everyone who's joined us tonight. I hope you found it informative. If you have missed any of this, I think we'll probably be having the replay up on our website sometime in the next few days, and I'm sure Equilibrium might be sharing it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Take care.
Take care, guys. Bye.
Bye.